How's it going, everybody? My name is Dr. Dean Fido from the University of Derby, and I am Program Lead for our undergraduate course in Forensic Psychology. I hope you're having a happy time zone, and sorry I can't be at the APE conference today. It's our induction week for our new cohort of students. But I wanted to pre-record a quick session for you to show you some of the key work we've been working on in the area of forensic psychology and the movement towards image-based sexual offending. I hope you like it, and I've left my contact details at the end, so feel free to drop me a tweet or an email just to ask any questions you have about the presentation. But before we begin, I just want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Craig Harper from Nottingham Trent University and Miss Yaya Rao, who have both helped me get this work off the ground and who have hopefully set the scene for developing this program of research in the future. So let's begin. So throughout this session, we're going to be exploring the label of sexualized deepfake media production, because I know it's something that quite a lot of people, and especially judging by our data that I'm going to be reporting, actually don't know what this is. We're going to be outlining the current state of international legislation pertaining to sexualized deepfake media production. I'm going to start calling it just deepfakes. And also, I'm going to present the first research findings ever in this area. Okay, so what is sexualized deepfake media production? In its essence, it sits under the umbrella term of a continuum of image-based sexual abuse. It sits amongst revenge pornography, which I'm sure you've heard about in the news and media. We don't actually like the term revenge pornography, but Craig and I have another seminar on why we should not be using that label. But just to kind of ease you into it and establish an understanding, that's the term we're going to briefly use here. Upskirting, again, it's been influential in the UK media over the last 2 or 3 years. Cyber flashing, which is kind of like sharing intimate pictures of yourself in an unsolicited manner. And also, obviously, deepfake media production. So, in itself, deepfaking is the use of machine learning techniques to superimpose an image or a series of images onto a still or motion picture of another. In forensic psychology, this typically manifests through taking the likeness of somebody, so their facial image, and superimposing it onto a still or motion image of a pornographic scene. Because of the complexity of the software surrounding this, even though it's relatively cheap and easy to use, the images are oftentimes considered very difficult to distinguish from real life. And of course, this has wider implications in political scenarios, such as developing material of politicians accepting bribes, behaving in an unlawful manner, or announcing potential impending terrorist attacks. However, as recently as this year, Abrams suggests that actually one of the most urgent threats using deepfaking is through the generation and proliferation of pornographic images. And that's going to be the basis of this talk today. But before we go on to talk about the legislation and also our research in this area, it is important to say that deepfaking isn't an inherently bad phenomenon. So, for example, it was used in a beneficial way very recently, where the likeness of Princess Leia was embedded into the Rogue One film, sadly, after the passing of the actress. Of course, though, it does have negative connotations, with Scarlett Johansson saying that trying to stop people making deepfake pornographic videos of her is now a lost cause. Every time they complain about a video, every time they try to have a video taken down, a new image or series of videos is produced and uploaded to pornographic websites. Okay, so in terms of related legislation around the world, this is it. There currently is no firm fixed legislation. Any legislation which does apply to deepfake media production is almost piggybacked onto the back of revenge porn related legislation or privacy related legislation. This of course varies around the world, and even in America there is no federal law pertaining to revenge pornography and as such deepfake pornography. And of course this could then proliferate perceptions that actually this behavior, these actions, don't actually carry much weight and they don't have that much victim impact. However, when we move on to the next slide and look at the wider impact that victims of all different types of image-based sexual abuse fare, actually this kind of turns it on its head. So for example, such victims suffer social consequences, embarrassment, familial strain, having their private sexual images spread. It can damage their reputation in these social circles. From a professional point of view, it can have grave consequences such as employment being terminated, damaging the organization's reputation. And also, on the back of this, it can have grave health consequences. And this data, although it is taken from revenge pornography cases, you can see how it might map on to those cases of deepfake pornography. such as the development of depression, anxiety, stress, untrustworthiness, and also has been related to elevated rates of suicide attempts and sadly completions. So, where does our research fit um, within this developing sphere? So, Craig and I have been working quite tirelessly to start to implement some psychological research into this heavily gendered world. Okay, a lot of the research which has come out thus far takes the perception from a legal angle, and we're trying to instill some element of psychological research underneath this. And the reason for this is simply that all other types of sexual offending has an element of psychological underpinning. And we therefore, if we are to see deepfaking, revenge pornography, upskirting as types of sexual abuse, it's important to understand the psychological precursors and also those predispositions to such offending. And on the back of this, public judgments, because it is the public to whom these offences impact the most. So we developed a two-part study. Again, this is my MSc student from the University of Derby. The overall aim of this series of work was to explore the judgments of deepfake pornography as a function of sex and the status of the victim. So in study one, we kept it quite simple. We took either a celebrity or a non-celebrity as the victim. Our participants consisted of 800 individuals, responders to Prolific, which is an online participant recruitment program. And the measures we took were measures of proclivity. Would they commit such offences in the future? Their judgments of deepfake offences, scales measuring belief in a just world, and also psychopathy. And to this end, we used the SRP4. Each participant was given a randomized vignette, standardized in a manner whereby each participant sees identical information, save for the key manipulations of the sex of the individual, the sex of the victim, and also the status of the victim. Our results were extremely interesting. First, we see that relative to non-celebrity victims, celebrity victims were seen to be suffering less harm, blamed more for their actions, and the offences against them were seen to be less criminal in nature. Moreover, we see that when the victim was actually a male relative to a female, they were also seen to be less criminal in nature. The second key finding is that throughout the research, although we never named deepfaking specifically, when we asked our participants at the end of the survey to describe or give a label to the types of behaviors which we've been describing throughout the research, only 6.6% of our participants, and it was a large sample, were able to accurately name the type of behavior. Deepfaking, sexual deepfake image production, etc., etc. We were extremely lenient. This suggests that even though this behavior is quite pervasive and can be easily identified online, not many people know about it, and so there's room for education. With education, we can grow morals and values around this particular type of behavior. And our third key research finding here was that self-reported psychopathic traits were able to significantly predict one's proclivity to not only make but also distribute such images in the future. And as such, we can see that on an individual basis, elements of personality, specifically psychopathy, could be a driving force in terms of underpinning someone's behavior in this type of offending. Our second study, albeit a little bit smaller at half the participants than study one, used very similar measures as well as 12 new vignettes to tease apart judgment based on two factors. First, the status of the victim, whether they was a celebrity, your friend, or a stranger. And the second, the hypothetical use of the images, for example, for personal gratification or for sharing with others. Bear in mind that in study one, all of the images within the vignettes were shared with other people. So we're going a little bit deeper here to tease apart these specific judgments. Here's an example of a vignette whereby the victim is a friend and the images were generated for their own personal gratification. Again, you can stop the video and have a quick read through this here. Again, we found some fantastic and interesting results. The main four are identified below. First, we see that greater judgments of criminality and harm for the victims when these victims were strangers versus when they were celebrities. However, this seems to be driven by male responders rather than female responders who did not show a significant difference between their judgment ratings. This maps very closely onto existing research, which sees that social media directed harm and online verbal abuse is seen to be less pervasive when the victim is a celebrity, potentially because they might be bringing it upon themselves. But again, this taps into the victim blaming literature, which we see within the realm of victimology. Second, we see that the judgments of criminality pertaining to this type of behavior were higher when the images were shared versus when they were used for their own sexual gratification. And as such, it might be that for the general population, we care very little about this secretive sexual gratification behavior, more so when these images are shared, potentially leading to these detrimental social, professional, and health and well-being consequences, which are documented earlier on in the seminar. Third, we see that psychopathy again is a driving force within these judgments, this time showing that those who score higher in psychopathic personality traits perceive incidents of deepfake media production, specifically sexualized deepfake media production, to be reduced in terms of levels of criminality versus those with fewer traits. And finally, we see that when rerunning the stats in terms of identification of this type of offending, this type of online sexual image based abuse, only 4.4% of this study 2 cohort could name deepfaking or deepfake media production. So, where does this leave us now? Well, this is only the first research paper in a series of those pertaining to deepfake media productions, but I want to be looking wider. The first future direction is helping to inform a model of image based sexual offending, drawing upon biological, social, and psychological influence. The second is identifying barriers which might stop people who have been victims from reaching out and getting help. Now, of course, these people are going to be fearful, inhibited by past experiences, and scared of repeat victimization. But we need to be identifying these barriers and breaking them down so that the true effect of such behavior can be researched and ultimately these individuals helped to the best capacity that we can. And third, because we're seeing such an influence and proliferation of the use of sexting within schools and as such the growth in terms of revenge pornography, we want to make sure that schools, teachers, and more importantly, children are being educated as to the morals and legal standings of such behavior more broadly and how this can have a great impact on their life, their education, and socialization. We're working with Dr. Dominic Petronzi from the University of Derby to implement these work packages, and hopefully in the new year we'll be taking them into school environments. For those of you who might be watching this from an educational background, we would love to hear you on the contact details in the following pages. Let me know whether you could help or whether you could advise on such projects. And finally, I'm going to draw the session to a close. I hope it's been something quite informative, something new and novel for you, something that you perhaps haven't heard about yourselves. I've left the contact details for myself and Craig should you want to get in touch with us with any comments. Our Twitter handles are on the left hand side as well. And all of this information is being back-ended into a book, which we hope to release on the 27th of November of this year, published by Palgrave, where we talk more broadly about image-based sexual abuse. We pick up on revenge pornography. We talk about upskirting, cyber flashing, and potential hypotheses as to how this behavior might manifest. So thank you very much, and please get in touch with any comments or questions.